Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to this afternoon's virtual workshop series. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by some of the team over at the Smart Cube. We are welcoming Omer, who is a managing director at the Smart Cube. As most of you know, the theme of the session today is achieving procurement excellence with robust market intelligence. Omer will be leading the discussion initially, followed by a colleague of his who will then chip in with some of the content midway through the webinar. In terms of the structure of the session, most of you guys have joined our virtual workshops previously, so you will know at the bottom of the screen there is a Q&A chat room, and there is also a chat tab where you can post questions. For the sake of the flow, we will try and wait at the end of the session to accommodate for the questions. If anyone does have any questions throughout, please do not hesitate to post them, and I will do my best to prompt the guys and let them know that you've asked the question. But if we can try and lead them towards the end, we'll get the presentation done initially, and then we'll open up some dialogue towards the end of the session. I will be here live on the screen throughout, so if anyone has any direct questions or any issues, please just let me know. But apart from that, Omer, I'll hand over to you, and we look forward to hearing what you guys are about to deliver.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Welcome to the Smart Cube's webinar on how robust market intelligence can help you achieve procurement excellence. As Daniel said, my name is Omer Abdullah. I'm the co-founder and managing director of the Smart Cube, where we focus on delivering custom procurement intelligence and analytics across both direct and indirect categories to progressive procurement teams all over the world. And you should be able to see my screen flip as we go through. All right. My co-host for this webinar is Phillip Duncan, who is a procurement veteran and the former CPO at a number of organizations, but most recently at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Phillip?
Thanks, Omer, and hello, everybody. I'll just spend 30 seconds just introducing myself. So for my sins, I've been in procurement for some 28 years now, starting out as a buyer and a category manager covering a variety of areas such as IT, packaging, food ingredients, professional services, travel, utilities, you name it, even slot gaming machines many, many years ago. However, I've been fortunate enough for more than half of that time to be a leader of category managers. So I've held the posts of head of purchasing for the Whitbread Beer Company. I was previously vice president of procurement for H.J. Heinz, the US food company. Then switching industries, I became the group CPO for Novartis, the Swiss pharma company, 2008 to 2013. And as Omar said, latterly, I was the first group CPO for Takeda Pharmaceuticals, 2014 to 2018 last year. So I've had the privilege to work for many great companies and even better people on nearly every continent in the globe, and fortunate enough to work in more than one sector, both consumer as well as pharma. So back to you, Omar.
Thanks so much, Phillip. All right, well, our conversation today is going to get into some real foundational details on the topic of market intelligence, and more specifically looking at intelligence and the role that it plays in driving procurement excellence, both overall at the procurement functional level, but also at the category level and beyond that. We'll cover the topic from multiple different angles, starting with why having access to strong procurement intelligence is essential. We'll then dive into the characteristics of strong intelligence so that you can, as the practitioner, meaningfully assess whether you're accessing and using the right kinds of intelligence. And then we'll look in some detail at the alternative sources at our disposal in finding the intelligence that we might be looking for. We'll then close out the discussion with a practical model. Phillip will actually go into some detail from his own experiences. And then we'll also close out with some pointed questions, a couple of checklists, if you will, that you can go back to your teams and ask so as to ensure that the intelligence that you're getting is on point. And if you choose to do that with an external partner, that the partner that you're working with is bringing what's really needed to the table. Okay, so now before we dive into this meat of our conversation, Phillip, I think our listeners might find it helpful if you could share perhaps your perspective from a practitioner's standpoint as to the value of MI and market intelligence within the context of the procurement world.
Thanks. Of course. So let me start then briefly by just posing a few thoughts about category managers and category management as the process. So the great news is it's being increasingly recognised as an important contributor to the profitability of the corporation, which is great news and great news for people in our function. However, as you'll hear in more detail in the rest of the webinar, that will also the amount of challenges that we're facing are also growing as well, hand in glove with the greater visibility of our area. And I've just listed a couple spring to mind. So we are seeing more complex supply markets. We're seeing increased market volatility. That can be commodities, FX, political. Brexit springs to mind. Also, our world is becoming increasingly global, whether we like it or not. It's not that easy to actually source everything local. So we need to have greater access and knowledge about global markets. Risk management is becoming more and more important, and particularly the growing importance of corporate social responsibility and its impact on supply chain in general and procurement in particular. And of course, a whole tsunami of information and data coming from the digital revolution, trying to pick out what's important, what's not, what's fake news. So clearly, I think, in my opinion, the biggest issue facing the category teams now is just how you disseminate, how you sift through this massive data to make smart judgments, to make those judgments quickly as well. And my view that's become clear over the years is that you cannot do that by yourself. The category managers don't have the experience, the time, if you will, to do this. Maybe in the simpler world of bygone years, the category leader could do this, but it's just not possible in my mind anymore. But the good news is that there's a whole area of expertise growing up on this, and we're seeing more and more practitioners of MI, and obviously SmartQ is a leading practitioner who come with solutions to this particular challenge. Omer?
Thanks, Philip. That's very insightful. Actually, right in line with actually the next page, which is around setting the context and kind of why market intelligence is particularly essential. I mean, as you said, the fact of the matter is that we are in increasingly uncertain, very challenging times. And I know it's a well-worn cliche, but it's true. We're sort of in this highly volatile, highly uncertain environment that we operate within, and some industries face it far more strongly than others do. But everybody faces it to some extent. And so we're being faced with these myriad of challenges that you talked about, and that are demanding so much more of us in terms of how we operate, the decisions that we make, and the speed with which we make those decisions as well. So again, just to recap, and Philip, you touched on many of these points just now. Global supply chains means category and procurement managers have to keep tabs on movements in the supplier base, including M&A, expansion, insolvency, changes to national, regional, international policy. And that's a consequence of our highly interdependent, highly globalized value chain that we work with, and not to mention tariffs and regulations. And just on that point alone, if you look at the tensions that have emerged between various trading partners, and most prominently the US and China, for example, over the last couple of years, add to that extreme weather events related to climate change, political upheavals in key sourcing countries. There's a lot of uncertainty around pricing and supply sources that are there. CSR, another topic that you touched on, Philip, something that's on everyone's mind. The bigger the organization, the more prominent the role and need to consider CSR is there. That's added another layer of accountability for category leaders. So it's no longer simply about identifying, specifying, and sourcing and getting the best value and deal. It's factoring in all of these other elements, including complexities and aspects like CSR, which are both opportunities but also challenges in how we do it. Certainly, the issue of risk hasn't gone away. So category managers have to identify and manage risk on an ongoing basis and help the business find ways to achieve its strategic goals while mitigating risk at the same time. That's always been important, but it's really expanded over the last decade or two in particular. And then last but not least, to your point around data, we're deluged with data, supply chain data from internal, from external sources. And I don't just mean market data or internal spend data or vendor information, which we always see, but we're also seeing this whole new environment of additional data from things like IoT, sensors, and that's only going to increase in the coming years. And the reality is, the issue is, we are not in simpler times, and most teams simply don't have the time or the expertise to extract actionable insights from it to drive strategic decision making. Philip, would you agree?
Absolutely. In fact, anecdotally, and this is maybe this is my experience, but I don't know, about 10 years or so ago, if I was called in by the CEO to give an update or to brief him or her about a particular supply chain issue or opportunity, then I was perceived as the expert. Increasingly, over the past few years, that's almost flipped on its head, because my CEOs, my CFOs, my chief medical officer, they have the same access to data, often get it quicker, and now they think they know best, and so I have to be extra smart, extra well prepared to make sure I can retain credibility and answer them in the right way. So again, the need to have great and speedy market intelligence, procurement intelligence is vital, absolutely vital.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most of us will agree with that context. And I think hopefully, around the virtual audience that we have, there's a lot of head nodding around that context and those specific challenges. And what they end up doing is they translate into specific targeted questions that we end up asking ourselves. So if you look at the bubbles on the left-hand side, some of the questions that we grapple with as category leaders, as procurement leaders is, we need to diversify our risks. So can we identify other sources of supply? And not only that, but not just identify them, but pre-qualify them to a level where we understand and get more supply chain visibility and transparency at multiple tier levels. How can we look at better engaging with suppliers? And that's not simply understand the financials of the supplier or the capabilities, but it's moving beyond that to look at aspects of innovation, supplier-enabled innovation, for example. Other questions are, how do I ensure that my category strategy aligns with my procurement goals? And that's not simply a matter of matching numbers, so we meet our procurement goals and therefore corporate goals, but it's a matter of aligning with the ethos, the strategy, the focus of the business itself. Oh, and then, of course, there are questions around what drives cost. Cost is fundamental to the procurement function. But what drives cost for my supplier? What are the drivers? How are margins playing out? Is my contract value competitive? What are the pricing models and bundles that I should be aware of? What are the emerging models of suppliers that are out there that we have to be aware of? So these are some examples of the kinds of questions that are adding to the complexity that we grapple with. And answering these questions is rarely straightforward. Many times what it does is it calls for nuance, for detail, for insight. And so the MI that we deploy, the market intelligence that we deploy to answer these questions, needs to be both relevant and contextual to the business. And that's an important aspect to assess when you're considering the source of intelligence. Does it do the job that you need? Does it require you to do additional work to answer the questions? And when we get into the checklist later in our conversation, you'll hear a lot about these as well. But of course, it all depends, right? So again, it depends on the sources. For example, syndicated intelligence helps with a lot of fundamental factors, good for quick and easy answers that you might have, simple data that you might need. But the so what's and the what next aren't necessarily evident in kind of the information that you might access through such sources, or necessarily always available, and really have to be derived at through custom intelligence. But that customization, what it does is it allows for a meaningful combination of internal and external context. And so therefore, robust intelligence requires you to look at a variety of different sources, including internal stakeholders, suppliers, other external stakeholders, publications, regulators. And frankly, today, given the volume of the data, the nature of the data, the velocity of the available data, really reliable and meaningful market intelligence should incorporate what we call AI plus HI at the Smart Cube, right? So artificial intelligence and human intelligence, technology that brings efficiency, right? So you're accessing the volume of data, the massive data that's out there, but then you're really making sense of it through humans, analysts who understand categories, businesses, and the context of why you're getting things done to really make sense of them. And of course, all robust MI from a procurement standpoint certainly should be backed by a deep category and functional knowledge and experience. This is why often you'll hear us talking not about market intelligence, but rather procurement intelligence, because that is another animal of its own, and it drives a lot of direction in terms of the source of where you're going to be able to get that information from. So in other words, decisions have to be based on proactive intelligence and robust insights. That's critical. That's essential so that businesses are given the edge and the ability to really thrive and make the right kinds of decisions. So, we wanted to start off with setting that context. So what do you look for when you're accessing market intelligence? Now, in a second, we're going to talk about the sources of market intelligence. But if we just look at what you should be looking for, in our view, there are 6 broad characteristics. So whatever you as the practitioner decide to end up doing, however you decide to access your market intelligence, it needs to meet these 6 sets of criteria. Okay, so number 1, it needs to be robust. So it has to be rigorous, it has to be reliable, and it has to draw from multiple. How credible is prone to issues, again, that tie into some of these other factors that you see on this page, of currency, of being contextual, etc. But looking at alternative sources allows you to triangulate and look at different aspects and really consider it. On the right-hand side, it has to be meaningful. The intelligence has to be presented in a meaningful and compelling way. And I'm not simply talking about how you present the information. Obviously, that's critical. And depending on who your audience is, for example, if you're a category leader presenting to your CPO, or you're a CPO presenting to your CEO or CFO, there has to be a level of executive readiness. But it's not just about presentation. It's about what you choose to include and what you choose not to include. And those are important aspects. You have to choose the right amount of information, not too much information, provide the right context and surrounding aspects so you're not leading, but you're informing, allowing better decisions to be made. Now, it goes without saying that that information also should be objective. Those decisions have to be made on accurate, unbiased intelligence, and that dictates where you get some of this information from as well and how you use it. So independent intelligence really provides a much more reliable foundation for decision making. And we'll talk about some of the implications or aspects to be aware of in just a second. The information has to be specific. It has to answer a specific question for a specific business, and that has far more value than general research on a market. Look, anybody can go in and access industry analyses on a particular area or category, but assuming you're not a 100% newbie in a particular category, you've kind of figured those aspects out already. So how do you go to the next level? How do you move beyond syndicated? And so your market intelligence that you access should be specific and go beyond that level, if you will. Certainly, the intelligence has to be current. It should be based on currently available data to avoid subpar decision-making that, frankly, can sometimes damage the credibility of procurement with stakeholders. So, ensuring that, particularly in those of you who work in categories that are dynamic, that are changing, for example, those that are tied to volatile commodities, you have to be able to look at that analysis from multiple different angles. And then, of course, it has to be contextual. It has to be aligned to the specifics of the business, the end users, and with analysis that really is more actionable in terms of what we do. So it should be clear, in a nutshell, that based on these characteristics, that the intelligence that we need to work with, that intelligence that helps us make better decisions, that helps us get things done, must be drawn from multiple data sources to make strategic decisions. Multiple data points that have to be triangulated to create a rich and accurate picture to help us answer the questions, to move the ball forward. But now, what are those data sources? So let's dive right in and look at the 6 broad sets of data sources that are out there. So the first one, and I'll cover these at a high level now because we're going to get into the pros and cons on the next couple of slides. But the first one is desk research, which anybody, you can go and sit at your desk right after this webinar and do it yourself. This is an internet search of freely available sources, trade publications, sometimes analyst reports, supplier websites. These can yield quick answers to simple business questions, but not necessarily provide competitive advantage. And we'll talk about that in a second. The second aspect is information from suppliers, right? An age-old source that we've all utilized. Useful sources of information offers specific knowledge around particular products, categories, countries, or other factors affecting the supply chain. The third one, which Philip also alluded to, and he'll talk about in his case example that he'll talk about in a second, is establishing an internal intelligence team to research specific queries and transform, how procurement contributes to the business. And this can be done on a formal level. It can be done on an informal level. So that's a kind of a third option, which all fall into kind of, let's call them internal data sources. From an external data source perspective, there are syndicated intelligence providers. I'm sure everybody has accessed and utilized syndicated sources. This is independent research from companies that do that sort of work over and over again, typically a market research firm. And they deliver reliable, objective, high-level information on market trends and developments. And again, we'll talk about pros and cons in a second. And then the last two are custom intelligence partners that take that step beyond syndicated providers. They can provide robust, objective, evidence-based research in response to particular questions, often mixing primary research, market data, and sometimes the client's internal data as well. And then last but not least, and again, I'll talk more about this in a second, is this new breed of what we call hybrid intelligence providers. These are organizations that kind of straddle multiple elements. They almost draw on every single aspect that we talk about here. They provide not only templatized research reports into particular key issues or tools and templates, but they also provide customized intelligence services to answer those specific queries as well. And again, this is something that's evolved really over the last decade more so as an additional option to consider when you're looking at sources. So let's kind of do a quick dive into pros and cons behind each of these different sources. So desk research, I mean, this is pretty straightforward. It's inexpensive, sometimes often free. It requires less turnaround time. It can be ideal for fact building. When I have a data point, when I have a specific piece of insight or information that I'm looking for. The aspect to consider is it requires the right level of talent. It requires a heavy reliance on published intelligence and relying on what's out there. And it can be limited in terms of its coverage. So that's the pros and cons of desk research. In terms of information from suppliers, if this information is easy to source, it's updated from time to time because you can just pick up the phone and call a supplier to better understand what's going on in that supplier's market or that context. And it's inexpensive, often free to be able to access it. But of course, there's a potential of bias. There's a potential for myopic insights because really you're getting information from a source that has a vested interest in the kinds of answers that they're providing to you. And of course, there's less room for triangulation because you don't have other points to be able to point to get at. Now, the third option is the internal intelligence team, the build-it-yourself model. This gives you a lot of internal context because you have people within the organization. It certainly gives you better control over the cost and the resource, and it's easy to customize by the stakeholder. But it can be an expensive, and it often is an expensive undertaking because think about it, it's more than simply hiring a couple of analysts and telling them to have at it. You have to give them the databases, you have to give them the training, you have to have the right level of talent and supervision and oversight to be able to distill the information, to use different sources or types of information and different types of analytical skill sets to be able to draw insight and information. And of course, having cross-category expensive. So that can get very expensive and require a lot of management to be able to get through. And then, of course, in our perspective, it results in a kind of a myopic approach necessarily if you only rely on that approach. I'm not suggesting that an internal team doesn't add value. It certainly does, but there's much more value that can be extracted by that internal team if you couple it with additional sources, which again, we'll talk in as we get into on the next page. So on the next page, we'll dive into external data sources. So the syndicated intelligence provider we talked about, ideal for fact building, relatively inexpensive, quick, easy to do because those reports are readily available. This is a great source for what I call the 101s of a category. If you have a brand new person who's never touched a category and they want to get smart and learn the fundamentals, syndicated sources are very helpful in that regard. Again, limited coverage though. There's little in terms of what next and so what do I do with it? And certainly there's no, by definition, because it's syndicated, there's no customized implications there. So the other option is then you go to custom intelligence providers. These are organizations that will access and distill the intelligence. They'll customize it for the client, for the industry. They'll give you targeted insights. They'll give you the so whats and the implications as well. But they can be relatively expensive. They require more time to work with and access, and it requires a lot of context setting to make sure that they're doing the right things and not over-speccing or under-speccing, so to speak. And then last but not least is this breed of provider called the hybrid intelligence provider, which gives you faster insights for fact building because they have some fundamental syndicated templatized information to provide. They give you tools, technologies, templates, a lot of robust insights based on custom work, based on specific context. And they are able to triangulate to deliver reliable insights. Of course, now this requires context setting as well, but that team can get to learn how you work. The economics are typically linked to value, and it requires a real level of commitment to see it through, to stick through to the path that you're heading down and really build a relationship to extract the most value out of it. Now, before I hand, so those are the 6 sources, internal as well as external. And before I hand over to Philip, let me just touch on briefly what we can do with these sources of information. So again, if we kind of take a stock of where we've come so far, we've talked about the value of intelligence. We've set the context as to why it's important. We've talked about the characteristics, right? The 6 characteristics you have to be aware of. Then we've talked about the data sources. Now, what can you do with it? Now, it's important to push the envelope, to think broadly. And I know Philip's going to touch on this in a second, but it's important to look beyond, when we think of market intelligence, we often think of, market analyses, market studies. We look at supplier identification, but it's important to push the envelope and be progressive in how and what market intelligence, what it is and how it can be used. For example, understanding things like best practices. What are other companies doing for your category? What are players within your sector and outside of your sector? What are they doing? What strategies have they deployed? How has that helped and hurt their organizations? What are the success use cases that are out there? And as important, what are the failure use cases that are out there? How can you use market intelligence to better understand should costs, right? Where the margin plays, where are the cost drivers? How is that changing? How can I use market intelligence to better evaluate and compare suppliers? Not simply from an RFI or an RFP, but frankly, helping to build scorecards and better comparisons of these organizations. How can I use market intelligence in my strategy setting exercise so that what I'm building is the right approach and the right strategy for what I have to get done for my category and my procurement department and my organization? And then right the way through, even past strategy setting and RFI, RFP implementation, right into ongoing category management, looking at things like contracting models, tracking contracting costs, or pricing movements and pricing volatility, looking into aspects of category monitoring, so you're up to speed on what's happening in a particular category on an ongoing and regular basis. My point in sharing this is it's important to not only look at what we traditionally think of as market intelligence, but to work with your team, internal and external, to be creative, to be consistent in what you're getting, to stitch together different data points, to be analytical, to be insightful, and really use that market intelligence not just as a data source, hey, go get me this information, but rather, I have this question, how can market intelligence help me answer that? And that's not going to come from a single static source. It requires creativity of application. It requires certainly some level of effort and thought and intelligence and insight to be able to do that. So those are all important points. And so as we talk about the sources, I wanted to also set this context that and I'm going to hand over to Philip in just a second, but as Philip gets into the models and his practitioner's perspective, think about how you can use market intelligence to push the envelope, to really think more broadly beyond, hey, just get me this data, get me this piece of intelligence to really drive value. So with that, Philip, let me hand over to you to provide your practitioner's perspective.
Thank you, Omer. Before I go into the detail of the category-aligned analyst model that we adopted, let me give you a bit of context first, because I think it'll make the solution more meaningful. So I was invited to lead a procurement transformation of a very large pharmaceutical company. I'll let you guess which one. Where we were given explicit savings targets, multi-billion-dollar targets every year for a period of time. So this was big stuff. And our CFO and CEO were going to talk to the investors and did talk to the investors about this. So we really had to deliver. So we established for the first time cross-divisional global category teams for all of our major categories. And just to give you an idea of the scale, because it really is, it's huge when I look back at it. Every category had a spend of circa $1 billion, some much more than that. We were servicing at that time 7 global businesses, some pure pharma, some generic, others more research-based, some consumer. So a real variety of end businesses. We were putting together strategies that had to cover sometimes up to 50 countries in some extreme categories. And whilst very occasionally you could have a one-size-fits-all strategy, 9 times out of 10 it had to be tailored to specific country solutions. The supply base was both global, regional and local. And finally, we had category teams physically dispersed in many countries. So a real complex area of servicing to do. We hired very good people, but part of our deal as leaders was to make sure that our category teams, our category managers, had the best tools that we could get so they could do their job properly. And clearly, one of those was to provide category intelligence. In fact, we didn't call it the hybrid intelligence provider at the time because we weren't that smart, but essentially that's what we were looking for. So my transformation team did look initially, actually, could we build this ourselves? We had a certain budget to develop this as part of transformation, but we quickly concluded that, frankly, we didn't have the time, we didn't have the expertise. We're not sure we had the headcount and ongoing costs that this would have put together. And there were other providers out there, even at that point in time, who could do the job far better. So we decided that we were going to outsource this operation, and we ran a quite a detailed sourcing event for our intelligence provider. We, in the end, we gave that business to the SmartCube. And whilst we had a top-line vision of what we wanted, it was actually working together with our friends, our partners at SmartCube. We actually put this model together as a team. And if you just move to the next chart, I think that this chart actually describes it very well. So we have obviously the various individual categories, and the SmartCube provided a dedicated person for each of the category, and that person was interviewed by our category leader, so he or she was comfortable with the quality of the dedicated resource. And in fact, other than their paycheck, that person with the SmartCube effectively became one of our team, one of our members. So they were dedicated resource, but of course they had at their disposal all of the areas of expertise you see on the right of the chart. So in turn, our SmartCube person could then, if you like, hand over various tasks to the resource pool on the right-hand side. And that worked really, really well. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised how quickly it gained traction and how well it worked. I mean, clearly there were learnings, particularly in terms of just monitoring and making sure that the dedicated resource spent their whole time doing just that, providing market intelligence to the category teams. But by and large, that worked tremendously well. And of course, in the end, you measure that through output. And whilst I can't say, employing this particular model delivered $1 billion of savings, our savings delivery overall went up dramatically. We regularly delivered over $1 billion of savings, which were quoted to the investors, put in our annual reports. And clearly, this is one of the key enablers that in my view, helped us do it. It gave our brilliant category leaders the tools to do the job. But there are also other spin-offs, obviously, apart from the dollars, the thought leadership and ideation that this gave us. And more we found that the category teams were sharing ideas, often facilitated by our SmartCube partners, and also, and therefore, improved the credibility of the procurement team. But also, more externally, it gave us more insight into what was happening outside of our particular company. I mean, we went around the world telling everybody we were best in class. But actually, it was a bit of an eye-opener, the sort of feedback and research that the SmartCube were doing for us. Actually, in some areas, we weren't that good. And so rather than fret about it, we did something about it. So overall, it's a model which has worked really, really well in my experience, and I would commend it to any other practitioner there to do it. Omer?
Thanks, Philip. That's a great example, and I appreciate you sharing that. I will add now. It's a great example of an integrated model where we had with the client. And I'll add that there's likely going to be variance. So if you're listening to this, you're a practitioner, there's likely going to be variance on the model that you may want to deploy within your organization, because it depends on your circumstances, needs, and requirements, the stage of evolution, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, that's perfectly fine, and that's the right thing to do. You need to tailor it to the requirements that you specifically have. The key takeaway, I think, also from what Philip has said, is about the nature of involvement, and that's really characterized by foundational principles such as partnership, right? So ensuring that the internal, external teams work side by side in a real trust-based relationship, and that drives collaboration. That drives integration of skills, right? Bringing to the table, like in this context, what we, the Smart Cube, are really good at, and what Philip's organization department, that team was really good at, what they brought to the table. It was able to have a real customer focus, right? So internal stakeholder, internal procurement, customer focus. And then bringing this whole diversity of skills and capabilities, as I referred to earlier, the AI plus HI mix, to really get to the right answer. So I think those are some foundational characteristics. So however you decide to deploy, and this model, that we worked with Philip on was a super exciting one. But however you deploy it, those foundational characteristics, partnership, collaboration, integration of skills, diversity of skills and capabilities, is absolutely essential to put it in place. So Phil, thank you so much for sharing that specific example. So, okay. Having now talked through the nature of MI and the context for it, the sources available, as well as talking through a practical implementation of a high-value MI model from Philip's own prior experience, let's close out our discussion with a couple of checklists. So the first is a set of 5 questions that you should ask for any study that you take on, regardless of sources. So in other words, if you're going to access intelligence, make sure you're getting the right intelligence for your needs. And how do you do that? Well, asking these 5 questions will help you get there. It'll also, by the way, help you flesh out your thinking so that the intelligence that you're getting is fit for purpose. It's not over-spec, nor is it under-spec specifically. And so the questions are, number 1, starting on the left-hand side, what are the objectives of the study and what business problems are you trying to solve? Now, that seems like a really obvious question, but it's actually more nuanced than we think. Let's get to the specifics. Don't say, I want to understand the market, when what you really are looking for is to understand specific supply options and capability sets. Those are 2 different questions and lead to different paths in terms of where you access info, what kind of information you get, and what level of depth that you go into. So really thinking yourself about the objectives, the specific objectives of the study, and what business problem are you trying to solve is absolutely critical. The second question is, are there hypotheses that you want to have tested? So oftentimes when we start looking for intelligence, we kind of base it on, well, I just heard this from XYZ supplier, or I was just at a networking forum with a bunch of my peers, and they said that there's this type of supplier consolidation that's going on in this particular region. So do we want to test some ideas, some hypotheses, some perspectives, and really validate whether our thinking is moving in the right direction? The third question is, of course, looking at what internal intelligence sources we have already at our disposal. So, and this is particularly relevant if you work with an external partner, is if you've already done the work, share that, right? And whoever's going to do the work, give them the internal info that you've already collected, because that allows you not to retread information that you've already got. Number 4, what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves? Again, seems like a pretty straightforward question, but it's important because understanding the must-haves and nice-to-haves allows whoever is doing the work of capturing that intelligence to focus on the right things. Let's get the most important aspects out and on the table. And in fact, this is a double value when you're working with an external partner. If you identify your must-haves and nice-to-haves, what allows the external partner to do, and particularly if they're a good partner of yours, to be able to come back and say, you know what, you've asked for 6 different things. We've done the work. So we've done the scoping of this. And these 3 are, which we are able to get, are nice-to-haves, but these 3, which we think is going to be hard to access, this type of insider analysis, is a must-have, but it's going to be hard to get hold of. You need to know that up front before work and effort and money is put in getting down the path. So those aspects are are absolutely essential to be able to understand, must-haves versus nice-to-haves. And then the other aspect, and maybe you should start with some of this as well, is how will you use the research and who will use it? So I know, for example, when we do work with our clients as a Smart Cube, we always ask this question. We always ask the question, why are you getting this work done? What do you want to do with it? If we understand that, and you can put yourselves in our shoes and ask that same question, if you understand why this work is being asked for, how it's going to be used, what it allows you to do is, as you get into the detail of the work that's being done, the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day intelligence work that goes on, if you can't find specific sets of information that are answering the direct question, you can look for proxy insights, proxy information, other relevant information that, while the data is not available, you still might be able to gather enough intelligence to be able to make the right decision. So these are the 5, in our minds, critical questions to ask when you're thinking about getting the right intelligence for your needs and being able to work with those. So that's the first checklist. The second checklist I'd like to close out with is, again, building on Philip's example that he shared. That if you decide to work with an external partner, it's important to ask specific pointed questions of those organizations as you decide who to work with. And these external partners, as I'll talk about in a second, it's an increasingly prevalent phenomenon. It's grown over the last couple of decades, and the options you have available have materially changed because the market has evolved significantly. And so it's important to ask these questions. So these questions are, can this partner integrate seamlessly with our business, right? Can they really be a partner to us, not simply a vendor to the organization? Number 2, will the intelligence they provide deliver a return on investment? Can they demonstrate a strong track record? There are a lot of providers that are out there that will provide you with data. The question is, can they understand your context? Can they align with your category folks? And can they bring the relevant category and functional knowledge that allows you to take actionable steps and make better decisions that get results? So that's a key question to ask. Number 3, goes without saying, do they have expertise in our sector? Have they worked in our space before? And sector, you can also couple that with category knowledge. Have they worked in my direct, my indirect categories, and be able to bring a lot of that intelligence and insights to the ground, so you're not starting from 0, you're really starting from 5 and building on the knowledge and the insight that they have by working, having worked with multiple companies, including some of your competitors, and being able to bring that level of insight and taking things to the next level. Number 4, can they deliver the intelligence that's needed in an ongoing and timely manner, supported by the suitable tools and technologies? And this is kind of where, you know, we talked about when you set up an internal intelligence team, it's more than hiring a couple of analysts. The partner should be bringing more than simply bodies. They should be bringing experts who bring technical skills, functional, category skills, but also tools and technologies to be able to get the right things done, okay? Then number 5, can we use this intelligence that's provided as is, or will we need to do extra work to get this ready? Is it client ready? Is it executive ready? Or do I need to then take this information and really do a lot of diligence and thinking in order to translate it into something that's actionable for me or my stakeholder or my team? Number 6, can they provide hybrid solutions? And this is sort of that new breed, and I'll talk about that in just a second, is can they be both templatized and customized in terms of output that they provide for deep dives, et cetera? And then last but not least, can they integrate internal and external data sources to answer our questions effectively? In other words, can they access not only your vendors and internal information sources, can they provide obviously databases, but can they access their own sources as they bring the information together? And implicit in this, which we're not going to touch on this, but it could be a subject for a future webinar, is analytics. So we've talked about market intelligence and data and information and insights, but hand in hand, more and more, particularly when you go back to the AI plus HI stance that we always talk about, analytics plays a critical role. So hand in hand, bringing external, internal data, really doing insight analysis, analytics to draw out more value and insight to make it actionable, credible, et cetera, is absolutely critical. So that's our 7-point checklist if you're considering working with an external partner. Philip, any other thoughts you might add to this?
Just a couple really. So as you said, that the choice of partner by definition is critical. So maybe one way to look at this is that the sort of the horrible, nasty commercials of doing a deal with a provider. I leave that to people better qualified than me. But I think when you interview the provider, and actually particularly some of the dedicated analysts, you should interview them as if they're a permanent employee. So you look for that sort of human fit. You look for the, will they become a good part of your team? But I just jotted down as we were talking, just a sort of couple of positives, but also some watch-outs as well, because it's not all wonderful. I don't want to mislead, but clearly the expertise, the resources, and actually the customer focus that a good external provider brings is just really, really good. But also a couple of practical things which don't sound particularly sexy, but actually that they're very relevant, particularly in larger organizations, is that there are no headcount implications. And I've spent most of my management life arguing and fighting and trying to get additional headcount or protect the headcount I have. And that's a reality of the real world. And it's also a variable cost by definition. But there are some washouts as well. Although it being a variable cost is good, it can be an area that sometimes gets cut in times of budget constraints. So be aware of that and look to protect it if you can. It's sort of allied to the to the interviewing part, but make sure you have a very good service level agreement, and make sure you're happy with the individuals. I think from memory, we insisted on named individuals. Once the agreement was reached with the Smart Cube in this particular example, we wanted those people to stay for a good period of time supporting the category teams. And make sure they do have that expertise as well. And I guess lastly, it's probably more of a wash out to yourself though, is keep a close eye on your own category teams who are well intentioned, but they're always looking for additional resources as well. And make sure that you can keep the dedicated MI people sort of pure, if you like, focused on providing market intelligence. It is very tempting when the pressure's on to get that they become another sort of pair of hands supporting a sourcing or auction or other pieces of work. So make sure, my advice is keep them pure, keep them focused on market intelligence. Omer.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much. And that last point I really appreciate, because as you think about working with partners, particularly external partners and different types of partners that are out there, that's something that we always say to our clients is, you know what, push us. Don't just certainly give us the fundamental work that has to get done, the basic work. But really where this capability has evolved is if the partner is going to be a partner to you, if the organization, the external organization is going to be a true partner, you should be pushing them to be progressive and really thinking through where how they can do more versus simply, as Philip said, being a pair of arms and legs to support you. So before we get to our closing thoughts, I just want to add a couple of comments about where, my perspectives on where the future of MI is headed, and particularly some of these newer options like the hybrid options that we talked about. So, as you think about these supply chains becoming more complex, we're more interconnected, we're more global, and the sheer volume of data and information that we've got, that we're working with, it's only going to grow. And you add to that advancements that are out there in technology, and this whole landscape for what we call intelligence and converting data into intelligence, that whole landscape is rapidly changing. So, while we talk about market intelligence, your focus as a category leader has to be on all types of intelligence. So solving a specific problem that you're facing typically will require more than one tool. It's going to require a variety of tools and techniques and capabilities and information sources. And as a result, often what that means is the option of going purely internal it's frankly, a lot less of an option that's there, unless you're willing to make a very, very material investment. So at the same time, purely going with external intelligence providers, they're being forced to grapple with this changing environment as well, and decide where they want to play. Some have decided they want to play syndicated, some want to be pure custom. But this whole breed of this hybrid intelligence provider that's emerged really is one that combines the best of both worlds. And I see organizations really moving in that direction, is working with partners who can leverage the best of their experience, their knowledge base to provide syndicated intelligence as a foundation for what they do, but then focusing on custom as being the differentiator, really providing a deeper dive. And not only that, they're also integrating deeper internal data analytics capabilities with these technologies, of course, including visualization. A lot of you are probably thinking about or using tools like Tableau, for example. And so what that allows you to do is provide really multi-pronged answers to questions that are being asked by CPOs and category leaders. You know, in my view, this is kind of where things are headed. The new age gateway is not about only going syndicated or only going with a custom. It's this hybrid model where you're able to tap into the best of both worlds, where you're not only looking at external data, you're also looking at analytics. And analytics will play a more and more prominent role in terms of how you are able to distill and convert the insights to really drive value forward. So in my view, that's kind of the new age gateway where things are headed for procurement organizations, to really seek intelligence that's timely, that's holistic, and that's as comprehensive as possible. So that brings us almost to the end of our webinar. And before we close out and take a few questions, Philip, would you like to add any closing thoughts?
Yeah, just a couple, but I'll keep this brief so we have time for questions. So, yeah, I think we've made it pretty clear that you know, the importance of MI is, you know, it just can't be understated. I don't see how you can shape a procurement strategy without you know, fundamental knowledge of what's going on, the access to data, and you know, that nuanced data. It's clear you need to build the right relationships with the vendor if you're going to go to a third party. As I said just recently, treat them as a part of your team. So interview them as if it's another team member. But it's also never too late to do this. When I first joined Novartis, the CPO, I remember having a meeting with Omar's colleague Gautam, who was telling me about the great things SmartCube could do. And I was, on a theoretical basis, I was very sold on this. But I said, Gautam, I don't have time at the moment. I'm trying to transform the function. Come and talk to me. But how stupid was I? Because this is, as I say, is fundamental to best-in-class procurement. So I learned a lesson there. Invest, you'll be under tremendous pressure to keep costs down. That's the way it is, but don't sacrifice MI spend. It's a false economy, in my view. And really, I'd sum it up in 3 words, a bit of a cliche, but it's so true. Knowledge is power. Omer.
That's great. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Philip. And so that actually wraps up our conversation on market intelligence. We have a couple of questions that have come in. And so, Philip, these are a couple of questions for you, actually. Why don't I read them out if you want to kind of provide your thoughts? Number one, how did you create openness to work with the third party among the category teams that already have several years of knowledge and experience?
Yeah, actually, it was pretty easy, actually. The category leaders, what we had, I mean, they did not lose control over the category because we used third parties for knowledge. And from my recollection, every single category leader actually welcomed the opportunity to increase the size of their team with specialist knowledge. I did say we had a big procurement conference as we did every year, and when we introduced it, I did say to the team that at the end of the day, you know, frankly, if you use this resource or not, I don't care. Of course, I really did, but I said I don't really care. However, you know, I hold you accountable for delivering, you know, the targets we have, and not just financial targets. You know, the innovation targets, the quality targets, the service targets. But I can honestly say that we had, I don't know, any pushback at all from our category leaders.
That's great. That's helpful to know. And I think that balance of skills, of complementary skills, I think is important to note. And I think implicit in what you've said also, and implicit in any successful partnership, is recognizing that we all bring strengths to the table. Yes. And it's okay. It's okay to say, hey, you know what? You know this better than I do. What do you think? And again, that's part of the whole trust and collaboration and openness and honesty is part of that relationship. But which I know those are cliches, but they always ring true. They're always relevant. They're always valuable in terms of how we partner.
That's true. So it's I never get precious, and I always say this to my teams about who did what. At the end of the day, we're measured on output, not input. So frankly, I don't care, never have really cared about where the information comes from, who does it. It is output, not input, that counts. That's what you get measured on.
Absolutely. All right, one more question, and that is, Philip, how do you maintain a balance between make versus buy? Did you have to create a business case for your CXOs for third-party intelligence?
That's a great question. Actually, I guess I was a bit spoiled, really. So where I've used MI extensively, they've both been big transformations of pharma companies. And I've been fortunate enough to have a transformation budget running into, in both cases, actually tens of millions of dollars. But these were big companies, and it was part of our overall business case. And again, fortunately for me, these weren't put together by myself. I didn't have the brain power to do it. I had a team of really brilliant transformational leaders who did this for me, but we made it an integral part of our business case. So the short answer is it was not an issue for us. We always had an internal point of contact, of course, for our external providers. So they didn't sort of run wild on this or run blind. But no, it was never an issue for us. I guess joining a mature company, who've not done this before, I guess you need to be a bit more explicit about the pros and cons. But frankly, I think it's an easier business case intellectually. You just need then to sell it.
Yeah, and I think for anyone who sort of is in the process of doing diligence here, if you speak to particularly the third-party intelligence providers that you're thinking about, they, ideally the right ones, should be able to provide you with the business case, right? In terms of what you do, how you're able to do it, what kinds of real action can be taken on the basis of the analysis that they put together. So again, it's a partnership. They should be able to help you objectively build the case and not simply say, this is the only option. The right partner should be able to say, look, you have X number of options, much like we've laid out earlier in this document. And depending on what you want to do, this is what you want to go after. And here's the ROI that you should be able to expect behind each of these and working with us, for example, as an organization.
Agreed.
Okay. I have one broader question around categories that are typically supported, and a specific question which we'll reply back to that individual on. But specifically in terms of categories, really, when we think about market intelligence, it really spans the entire procurement universe. So the question broadly is, what categories can be supported through market intelligence, and really it covers both direct as well as indirect categories, so the full spectrum. Of course, the direct side is influenced, obviously, by the sector, and particularly whether that company has a depth in the particular sector, whether it has clients in the sector, et cetera. And then beyond that, the remit also should go beyond specific direct and indirect categories, but looking at cross-procurement aspects. So, for example, if a CPO is looking at alternative organization models, if there's a broader make-buy analysis that's being made, if there are, for those procurement organizations that touch into aspects of supply chain, broader network analysis, optimization, optimization type of work that's being done, it should fall into those remits as well. So there's a wide swath that can be covered as well as part of all of this. So those are it's a quick answer to the question of the remit of market intelligence and how broad it can necessarily go.
Sorry, go ahead. I just one more question pop up from Angela saying, were the SmartCube analysts supporting your team full-time or part-time? I can answer that very quickly. The Novartis model, the analysts were full-time. I guess if the company is a lot smaller, then maybe there's a sharing, but we had dedicated resource full-time, and that's how they became an integral part of our team.
Great, perfect. I think that wraps up all of our questions. Philip, do you have any other questions at your end?
No, that's all I can see.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Philip, for joining us and being a part of this webinar and sharing your insights that are very practical, very insightful.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody on the call. To everybody called for joining the webinar, and look out for additional webinars as we organize and execute this going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys. This is Dan here from Industry IoT. Really, really great session. The session will be recorded and be available for all of the attendees. If anyone has any further questions, they can communicate them with me directly, and I will, of course, pass them on to the team at the Smart Cube. But apart from that, it was great having you all online this afternoon. Thank you to Omer and Philip for delivering a great session, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.